Bathsheba. People always say, "Oh, David's sinning, David's sinning." What about Bathsheba? Wasn't she sinning too?
Yes, but wait a minute. Hello, my name is
Abby Langley.
Oh, you're PJ's. Is that his name? LJ's. And he goes like this. Any of you guys watch him? I'm so afraid he's going to drop those sticks. He's playing and going like that while he's doing it. So, I do watch. So LJ's sister, Bathsheba. Yes, she was. Do you know very many people that live, if you go to Israel today, I'll answer this one real quickly. The city of David, they've excavated, and it's precipitous. It is totally perched on the side of the mountain that goes down to the valley of Kidron, and they've found David's palace. And David's palace is just like this, and when you go to the edge of it, and I take groups there every time, we did it just the last time, and you look down, you can see an Arab woman beating the rugs in her apartment. You know, her house is right below the city of David because Silwan is a Arab village in the valley of Kidron. And when you're standing in David's palace, you can see the clasp on her earrings standing in that palace. She's beating her rugs. I mean, you're looking directly down like a drone view. And can you imagine living with the biggest house in town right above you, and everyone knows it's King David's, and you put your bathtub right there, and you take a bath and take all your clothes off and take a bath right under his deck? I mean, yeah. I mean, but what most people don't know is she was the granddaughter of Ahithophel, who was David's counselor. So David had watched her grow up. And there is a real danger. I heard it in Paul's sermon this morning of older men. I'm not sure if he was talking about, whatever's in the news or whatever, but of older men starting to migrate their desires away from their God-ordained wife and starting to look for someone younger. And David had watched Bathsheba grow up. She grew up in his court. Probably he was in his 50s, and she was probably in her 20s. And so he'd seen her as a kiddo, and then he saw her get married to Uriah was one of David's mighty men. I mean, we're talking about a Secret Service agent's wife, and this Secret Service agent died for David, and he took advantage of that relationship. So, plus her grandfather was his greatest counselor. So, yeah, she was, I would say, equally at fault. But David knew more than she did because she wasn't a Bible writer. Now, let's go to this. Let's go to 2 Samuel 11, because I thought this question was very interesting. And if everyone hadn't spent so much time asking the questions last week, this is what I would have said. No, not really. I'm teasing you. This was a good question. Did both of them sin? Yes. Clearly. I mean, Bathsheba was not raped. It doesn't ever say that. So it was agreeable between them. But look at what God emphasized. See, this is what's interesting. The answer to this question is, what does God emphasize? We have the record of God watching the events unfold. What did he choose to write down? See, that's what the repetitive reading of the Scriptures slowly does to us. We start seeing life from God's perspective. What is it that the Lord picks out? I mean, if you go, our guide in Israel that we've had for 25 years or 20-some years died at Mother's Day of this year, and so we had a new guide that I'd never met before, never knew anything about. In fact, it was a lady whose name was Zipporah, like Moses' wife, Zipporah. And so here, we're meeting her, and it was so fascinating, after all these years ago in the Holy Land, to hear what she pointed out and what she didn't. And I didn't know anything about her, and the first day I was kind of watching her. I was doing my part, she was doing hers. And finally I said, "Could you tell me a little bit about yourself?" She said, "Well, yeah." She said, "My father trained all the tour guides in Israel for 40 years. And she said, "My husband's the general over all the Israeli intelligence." She says, "Why do you ask?" I said, "Because you see something different in these sites than I've ever heard anybody point out. And you learn from people what they point out and what they don't. What did God, look at 2 Samuel 11. It says, verse 1, David remained in Jerusalem. David knew well that temptations often strike when we're alone and when things aren't on the normal schedule. Verse 2, and it happened one evening. Unscheduled time, random time is always dangerous. He arose and walked on the roof of his house. He already knew that he could look everywhere, and it's evening, and people always came in at the end of the day and had, they're getting ready for, supper and all the bathing that Israelites were supposed to do. And from the roof, he saw this woman. He's totally undisciplined. And what's interesting is the end of verse 2, it says she was beautiful to behold. Do you know what that word behold means? To continuously watch. I remember when I was at Bob Jones University that old Dr. Bob, one of them, the first or the second, always said, you can't stop, I forget what kind of bird he called it, crows from flying over your head, but you sure can stop them from making a nest. I thought, that's a curious statement. But what he's saying is this. Almost anybody could, just curiously walk up, glance over the edge, and go, whoa, that's not something I should be looking at, and walk away. But she was beautiful to stare at. And so, verse 3, look what happens. David is see what God's pointing out? The Lord is pointing out how many hurdles David went over. He blew off the schedule. Kings go to war at this time. He blew off the schedule that you don't walk around at night. It's kind of like your neighbors don't forget to close their curtains. You don't take advantage of that as it gets dark and the lights go on in the house. You learn the propriety. But David, he just blew by all those. But look at verse 3. So David sent and inquired about the woman, and someone said, isn't that this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? What they kind of gave her full documentation. They said, don't you know who this is? I mean, as if he didn't. They give her pedigree, ending with, she's married, David, to one of your Secret Service agents, your bodyguards. You know who that is. She's married. See, that was a guardrail. And David pushes right over the guardrail. And David sent multiple messengers. I mean, this guy is unashamed and unheeding and uncaring, sends her home. And then look at verse 6. Send me Uriah the Hittite. He tries to cover his sin. You see, yeah, they both sinned. But God points out David's sin more than Bathsheba's. Why? That's very interesting to think about. And I immediately came to this. God looks at how much we know. Think about Deuteronomy 17. The Lord said, David, don't you remember when you're copying your copy of the Bible? You're not supposed to think yourself above anybody else. You're not supposed to think you deserve whatever you want. You're not supposed to think you're special. Our culture, everybody's special. Yeah, and some people act like it. And they think they're better. And David, no, be humble. That's what gets God's attention. And look at the very last verse of chapter 11, verse 27, the last sentence. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Now think about it. That's all that matters in life. I have a personal operating system that I filter everything through. I really have a very simple life. I have two goals: please God and do what he left me to do, make disciples. Where's the please God from? Right here. What David did displeased the Lord. It doesn't say he broke commandment number, 7, adultery. It doesn't say that. It says the whole thing displeased the Lord. And we don't want to do that. See, that's what love does. You don't want to displease the one. And David knew. I don't know how much Bathsheba knew about the Lord. She was married to a Hittite. Someone from Anatolia, from, Turkey, from that area. I mean, the Hittite Empire. She married a foreigner. David knew God. So the Lord, look at this, Luke 12:48 with me for a minute, and I'll finish off on this question. I mean, there's so much more we could ponder, but Luke 12, I hope I typed the right one. 12:48, whoop, I'm not on the right one. Oh, here we go. He who does not know yet committed things deserving stripes shall be beaten with few, and everyone who much is given, for him much will be required, and to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more. You see the principle that the Lord says, David, you knew Deuteronomy 17. You knew so much more. You knew me. And I threw in front of you barrier after barrier. I sent you to war, and I sent a servant who stood up to you and said, you shouldn't be walking around looking over that, and that's a married woman. And you just plowed through all that. And so much is going to be required of you. And if you notice, God, if we had gone through 2 Samuel 12, did you know that the penalty for stealing was that you had to repay fourfold? That's why they didn't have 3 million people in jail like we do in America. If you stole something, you had to work for the person that you stole from until you repaid 4 times what you stole. I mean, there was capital punishment, God instituted that, but if you didn't do something worthy of capital punishment, you, through hard labor, managed by the person, I mean, you had to kind of get to know the person that harmed you, and there's just so much wisdom in all that. So David stole the life of Uriah. And so God said, you're going to repay fourfold. Bathsheba's firstborn child is going to die, and then Ammon is going to die, and Absalom is going to die, and Adonijah is going to die. And you're going to pay 4 times for the one life you took. You know what David said? Okay. See, that's why the Lord required so much of him. He knew so much, and he was responsive. And I could go on and on that one.